My name's Alexandra and I run the Artist Residency programme here at Porthmeor Studios. We've had a slight change to the schedule. You were expecting Wells Frey-Smith, curator at Barbican, who was going to be in conversation with Noorain. Sadly, Great Western Rail had other ideas, and so Wells is stuck in London, and so that means you're stuck with me for the evening. So it's going to be me chatting to Noorain about her practice, her residency, and yeah, all things. So to say a little bit, to introduce Noorain. Noorain is the recipient of the 2023 Wilhelmina Barnes-Graham Residency Award for Emerging Artists and has been with us on a 3-month residency from July this year. And it's actually such a treat to be hosting the event tonight in her studio. So all of the works that you can see here were all created during her residency. So in the last, almost 3 months, it's kind of been an amazing body of work that's been happening. So I know that a lot of it, you've got your back to it, but at the end, please take some time to have a look. Noorain and I are going to be in conversation for about 45 minutes, and then we'll have a bit of time for some questions at the end. So I wonder if we start, if you tell us a little bit about your background and your training as well, because I think that's kind of a really key feature in your work, and I think will be really interesting for people to hear about.
Oh yeah, I'm Noorain. I moved to London about 2 years ago. Actually, this week would have been my second year here, and I came to the Slade for an MFA. And this was right after my training as a miniature painter in Pakistan, where I'm from. And miniature painting sort of originates between Persia and India. And so I was trained in a very specific school of painting, just Pahari style of painting. And that's why there's a lot of, as you can probably tell, vibrant colors. And when I moved to London, I had this kind of visual vocabulary that I was so familiar with, but I had the opportunity to go to museums and galleries. So all of the, Rothko, I have like a funny memory of when I saw his work for the first time, it was in one of those museum gift shop books. So I assumed it was a really tiny painting. And when I came here, it was like, oh, that's the scale of it. But so it was really interesting for me to see so many of the works that I grew up, learning from. Yeah. And I don't really come from like an artistic background, so a lot of my knowledge of it came to going to people's houses and seeing what books they had. Probably not appropriate to do that. And so then when I came to London, the Slade was this sort of such a different environment from anything that I knew before. It was the works, I found a way to sort of incorporate myself into the paintings a bit more. And I learned how to stretch canvases over there, which was amazing. And then this body of work sort of came out of, my own experiences of living in London, living by myself for the first time, which was so strange. And then got to, I guess, a few months after graduating as well, I met Kritika at Indigo Matter, and then I had this I was preparing a body of work in this basement in Hampstead. It was a really small studio where we would stretch outside the room. And so I had these kind of works that came from a lot of the readings that I was doing at the time. I discovered this writer when I moved here, Amparo de Villa, and she's a Mexican writer who's now since passed. And her works are kind of inspired by a lot of surrealism and almost like horror fiction. And I found a kind of solace in that space. And so a lot of my works are actually inspired by the writings and readings. I sometimes find that there's like a link between words and paintings. That's why we'll probably go on this later, but the titles are very, very important to me. And then a few months in after my first solo show, I got this DM from Wells. It was an Instagram message saying, hi, there's this opportunity at Porthmeor and you should check it out. And I applied and I was fortunate enough to have this, and I'm here and it's been amazing. It's been the most I didn't expect it to be such an emotional 3 months. I just thought I would make paintings and get out of here.
We had other ideas.
It was so much, it was nothing that I could have anticipated. And I think getting to be a part of, this town for 3 months has been so wonderful, and meeting some amazing people. And
yeah, that leads me on quite nicely actually to, I wonder if you could speak a little bit about your residency experience. I mean, you'd never been to Cornwall.
Never been to Cornwall.
Never been on a residency.
Never been on a residency. This is my first year as a working artist, and I had heard of Cornwall because I had a friend going for a wedding, and all she said was like, yeah, it's really beautiful. That's about it. And when I first got here, the first day, it was raining so much. It was grey. And there were 2 men at the station, Alvin and Chris were there to pick me up. And I thought, where have I come? And then when I got to the studios, Alvin was nice enough to show me on the first day that I landed. I was so excited, just because I had read up on the history of all of the artists that have occupied the space. But the paintings for me, because I work in a very kind of, I really spend a lot of hours in the studio, but I found that all of my thinking and processing was happening outside of it. So whether it was going to Bozigran, which I now know is different from Zeno, totally different, and it was seeing this kind of cliffside, and and it was being out in nature for the first time, and I think I would say 5 or 6 years, because London is, it's a treasure trove of knowledge and museums and galleries, but there's not a lot of greenery, at least not from, if you don't count the parks. It was nice to be away for, I had my phone switched off that day as well when I had gone, so I kind of was just by myself, and I don't know whether it was the wind that was really hitting my face. I started crying. I couldn't tell what that was. So now I don't really see these paintings as paintings. I look at them as almost like traces of experiences that I've had while living here, whether it would be from the conversations with people, and I'm very nosy as well. I really probe for questions, whether it's asking the artists about the materials that they use here, or something like, why did they move to this town? And Alexandra and I have these conversations too, where I would ask her, like, can you believe that you're here sometimes? Yeah. And she says, I have a pinch me moment once a week. I had so many of those. I got to see the most beautiful sunsets here, and learning about the history of this town. And I think there's also like a little bit of magic here. Just some of the folklore is so interesting to me. And then the studio just became a space to process everything that's been going on. A lot of the motifs that you probably see are some things that I've seen while living in this town, whether it's like, it's so interesting. I work pretty late nights sometimes, and I would always see a man searching for gold. Like, he's got those metal detectors by the beach. So I just had to chuck that in there. And it is very interesting to be by the seaside as well. And we also talked about Alice Oswald.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. So I know that you've been reading Alice Oswald, so for anyone.
Oh yeah, Nobody, which is
here. And I kind of thinking about Alice's writing and your painting, to me, has been really interesting, because I guess in a number of ways, so Alice, if anyone hasn't read her work, she writes a lot about water. And this book specifically is about the sea, and her work Dart was about a river. And thinking about elements, then you have fire a lot in your work, which I find really interesting. And I know that when you first arrived, we kind of spoke about being so close to the sea, and if water was going to start coming into your paintings, which I feel like there was some resistance to that at first. But then, I wonder if you could speak a little bit about that.
I, strangely enough, also, I read, I think in my teens, I read The Old Man and the Sea. I was forced to by my mom. I didn't want to. So you have to read this. And Hemingway kind of talked about it was man versus sea. It's almost like this challenge. And I've noticed that in a few writers. But with Alice, it's kind of like a surrender to the sea, because it's so vast and expansive, and it's not something that we can ever understand. And she really talks beautifully. She's got a lecture at Oxford University as well, where she talks about the link between grief and water, and how the two are constantly flowing together. And I find that so beautiful as well. And I think when she was speaking about the kind of expansive quality of water and how you're almost so intimidated by it, but you can't help but surrender yourself to it. I used to feel that way too. It was a month into the residency and we were talking and I said, I haven't been down to the beaches yet. And she sent me a text saying, you have to go now.
I think I just assumed that she would walk on the beach.
I think everyone just goes. I never went. I would just see the sunsets from my window and
that was enough.
It was enough. I thought that's great. I think there is something to be said about, actually putting your feet into the sand and then going and you have this kind of expansive blue up in front of you, and it's nothing like I'd ever seen before. And I grew up by the beach, but this was a very different sea. And you're kind of by yourself, which I think is so interesting because it's not something I've really experienced before in my life. Like, I'm 25 now, I should have, but it was really almost healing to be by the sea. And that painting that you see over there is inspired by just taking a walk on the beach and seeing the sunset, because I do think there is something to be said about the sunsets here. They're so rare. And you're so mindful of all of your senses. It's like you can hear the sound of the ocean, you can feel it, in your feet. And that's the sort of link I felt with Alice Oswald's writings, where it's about surrender. And I think when you resist painting something too, like I came in saying, I'm never painting the sea. My sketchbook will beg to differ because I've done that quite a few times too. And I find her words really comforting too, as we've all experienced grief in some capacity as well, and I think there's a kind of link between. I had someone once tell me that grief also flows in you, and it's also like the remnants of love for someone, and I find that really wonderful too. So the works have a sense of, I think, longing as well. It's nice to be able to look at them from a distance now over here. I don't really get to do that in the studio. You're just making. But that painting over there is inspired by Nobody, which her work is actually inspired by Homer's Odyssey. But it talks more about, in a way of, I think, the kind of emotional side about being by water and what that can do to you. And I had seen a sunset here for the first time, and beds are, again, a huge motif in my works, as Kritika will also know. I think I was bed girl for so long. All I was doing was painting beds at one point, and I get asked this question a lot because to me it's kind of like that departure point between reality and imagination. Just as you're about to fall asleep, you begin to dream. So it's been nice to be able to incorporate all of that into the works here.
Thinking about the beds, I feel looking at your work, you have quite a lot of kind of recurring motifs and symbolism that I know that I've noticed kind of in the few months that we've spent together.
Oh yeah, the motifs are something. So I sort of, I do a lot of my research outside of the studio. With surrealism, for example, I found that a lot of the artists, so there were two sides of it, which is automatism, which is more like kind of gestural work where it's part of your unconscious mind. And then there's symbols that you can add together. And some of them are inspired by some of Freud's works. But for me, the repetition comes from my miniature practice of having to replicate paintings for years. That's kind of what we would do. And as grateful as I am for the practice, it was nice to be able to come out of that. And the beds and the chairs kind of ground you in a space that's so expansive, like the sea. I feel like for me that becomes a way to create that world. You probably also notice like the tiles are, again, moments that I've seen while being in the town. And I kind of weave the stories around that. So the tiles can inform a lot of what's happening in the paintings and vice versa.
It's interesting you bring up the tiles because we've spoken a lot about kind of materials and process, and thinking about kind of your really big canvases and how you approach those, and you mainly work with oil and acrylic, but then you've got those juxtaposed with these kind of small tiles that, we've spoken a lot about the kind of materials
that was
and the difference.
I remember I had gone to Tate's and Ives, and I came across Mohammed Malehi's work, and so I did some research on him, and he had left a kind of very illustrious career in New York to go back to Morocco and make work. And but he opted to work with very cheap materials like wood and enamel, anything that was accessible to quote-unquote the working class as well. And I also got to speak to some of the artists in residence here, and I would ask them about the choice of material. There's no kind of hierarchy, which I like, you know, and so I sort of decided, because the works that I use, very expensive materials as well, like whether it's pigment, or I've even used gold paint in some parts of that one over there. I thought it would be so interesting to kind of understand the mechanics as opposed to the aesthetics. So the material that you're using, or the kind of intention that you have of making. And initially I would only make the tiles at home, and then I brought them into the studio because I felt like I shouldn't have to make that distinction, and that work is just as precious as, you know, the painting stretched on a canvas. I also spoke to an artist here who talked about working with nail polish, and he said something that made so much sense to me. I said, why did you use nail polish on paper? He said, yeah, it's enamel, it's the same thing. I thought that's so interesting to have that. So I went on Amazon and bought very cheap balsa wood for like £5. And then I bought felt tip markers, and I made these drawings, which I've grown so fond of, and it's kind of become a way for me to almost transcribe as opposed to create. And I struggle between the two sometimes, and yeah, it's just been, I'm really proud of those works. Yeah. Oddly, more than the paintings. I love the tiles.
The tiles as well, I think, because before you made those, Noorain and I have been speaking a lot about tarot, and you had your kind of favourite set of tarot cards, which you'd kind of been speaking about maybe painting your own, but instead I feel like what's happened is these tiles and seeing them as kind of a step.
We really spoke a lot about the tarot cards, because that became, it was something that I had found in London next to it was a store next to my art supply store, and I was with a friend and we just kind of picked it up and we drew a few cards, and it just became like a regular thing that at the Slade we would just do from time to time in the studios. I think we all needed some kind of solace, like this is going to be okay. So it's nice when a card tells you your good fortune is on its way, and we would just believe it. And I thought the imagery was also so interesting, because it was so almost similar to the style of miniature painting. I think that's the closest painting that I've held in my hands. We do have a card over there, but
I had it here to show you, but she was saying it was giving bad energy, so I got that far away.
We're already kind of nervous.
Throw it
here.
out the window.
It's gone. And yeah, it's just, I think it's a kind of, it's what I also do like about, I think sort of the culture of the town is everyone is so open to any sort of belief and possibility, and I think painting is just that. It's just having your mind open and be willing to experience, you know, something that you don't understand. And Alexandra and I talk about fear and horror films a lot too, of, you know, where did that kind of come from? And I do find there to be this sort of link between that. I think fear can sometimes remind you, it does make you ask the big existential questions too, of why am I scared and what am I scared for? And fear is, I think, intrinsically linked to every emotion that you feel. The moment you love someone, you begin to fear losing them. The moment you grieve, you begin to fear that whether the feeling would stop. And I became really fascinated with that as well, and I don't really mind getting scared now. I find that to be comforting. I think comfort scares me the most. And yeah, so I actually grew up watching a lot of horror films with my dad. It was a bad parenting choice now that I think about it. Shouldn't have made me watch Exorcist so young. But yeah, and Wells and I were talking about, I think Beetlejuice is, I was way too young when I watched it, but when I lived in Birmingham for those, I think when I was about 6 for a couple of months while my dad was doing his master's, and the cable was really bad there. It's all I remember was The Weakest Link, and like Beetlejuice used to be on all the time. And I think, yeah, I kind of escaped into that world of fantasy and horror fiction, and the result is these paintings sometimes.
Yeah. I know that kind of when I first came across your work and saw your portfolio, the thing that instantly struck me, as well as obviously the paintings, were the titles of the work, which obviously you can't see here, but I'm going to read you some of my favourites. We have man ate poison peach and went to sleep. 101 ways of making bleach at home. A house on a hill, a car in the middle of the sea. And my personal favourite, call your Uber and leave. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about what's going on when you create those titles.
I can give you the smart answer, and I can also give you... So there's this term in literature that Hemingway coined, flash fiction, which was that he had sort of placed a bet. Friends had a wager with him that you can't write a story within 10 words. And he was like, yes, I can. And I won't say the story because I find it too dark, but it was just this idea that you can give away the context of a story within a couple of words. I think painting titles should feel that way too. You should... I know it can't sort of make or break a painting, but it can set you up into that world. And so he has this theory about, I read a lot of Hemingway, which was like the iceberg theory, that the tip of the iceberg is everything that you can see, but the bulk and the base of it is what you can't. And for me, the base is the titles. So that kind of gives context to what you're looking at. And as for the stories, I find it just to be a way of, really escaping into imagination. And there is a bit of humor in them as well. When I hear them back, I think, God, what's going on with this person? It's like 101 ways of making bleach at home. So it's just, I try to phrase it in a way of all the things that I'm afraid of. I have a journal that I also note down, and while I was living here, it was a bit difficult because someone would say something memorable and I would say, can you repeat that? To put it in my iPhone notes. And then the titles kind of became a way that I could weave a story. I did have a kind of title for this body of work, which is my branches were cut by Geppetto to make Pinocchio. And Pinocchio is one of my favorite stories too. And I just think there's something so interesting about a lot of the childhood stories that were told. And there's a very imaginative but dark quality in them too. And I find that the writing for me helps to sort of solidify the world in a way, to make it more real. Because I feel like if you can't convince yourself of the space, you can't convince someone else. And I really enjoy that. I think this is also the closest I'll get to be a writer. So I should really take advantage.
I feel like you've been these amazing sketchbooks on the table.
Oh, yeah.
One you'd already been working on before you came here, but and then I'm right, this one is since your residency.
So this has a lot of sort of the writings that I would have, whether it would be, so I had seen, there's The Island by the beach. They would know the town a lot better than I do. The Island. And there was a really interesting tree that I saw there, and I went back home and I wrote a story about a tree that is so charming, it swallows people whole. So it swallowed me, and I would meet someone over there. And I think it was a purple horse that runs in a circle, and a clock that's stuck at 3 in the morning. And you will find all of those references in the paintings as well. And it's this kind of bizarre, imaginative world. And there's a wonderful quote about this, which is knowing how far to go without going too far. It's be in the absurd, but not in the ridiculous. And I sometimes cross that line from time to time. I'm hoping by my 30s I'll have it mastered. So the titles kind of just become a way to set the foundation for the paintings, and I really enjoy that time. I also, because I never really had a vast visual vocabulary, which I find it so wonderful that children are taken to museums and galleries here, because I never really had access to that in Pakistan. So for me, it was through stories. I would go to bookstores, I would study the covers. Goosebumps is great. R.L. Stein knew what he was doing. And I think so writing for me kind of was the stepping stone into this world of imagination that I wouldn't have had access to before. And I just found painting to sort of go hand in hand with it now. And yeah.
So do you think of the titles before the painting, or does it what's that process?
Yeah, there's some paintings that I look at and I see it comes to me about a third of a way while I've made it, because that can kind of inform also what each painting gives you. And it's an important question I never thought to really ask myself while I'm making is, what motivates you to paint something? And there's a wonderful quote in context of painting, in context of Munch's works, which is, painting shouldn't be the reconstruction of a moment. It in itself should be a moment. It should only come into being the moment it's expressed and not before that. And that was something I really understood while I was living here too, because there's so many wonderful scenes, like being by a cliffside, and you realize that that moment, maybe you just want to keep it for yourself, and it doesn't have to necessarily turn into a painting. It could become a writing. There are also some great ideas which are better for stories, I've realized, and that's not going to be a painting. I've learned that in the studio. That's the paintings you don't see. It's the ones that don't work out. They're in the bin now. And yeah, the titling, it does, I think you kind of escape and enter a certain frame of mind to be able to do that. I write a lot at home. I try to avoid writing into the studios because the studio is just for painting and processing, occasionally crying too, just it should be. And it's just been an amazing time having the chance to, you know, look back at all of the works now and see the traces of everything that I've experienced left behind.
I wonder if you could, I'm aware that this is the painting that everyone can see, and
yes.
You know how much I adore this painting.
This is
I wonder if you could tell everyone just a little bit about kind of the imagery and
so there was a moment when I was in Buzzy-Gran and I had never kind of been by a cliffside before. I'm not a very outdoorsy person, but I had noticed something about eye level where I was looking at everything from an almost panoramic view. I never looked up at the sky, and now I think, God, I should have. So I wanted to make a painting about that sensation. So the kind of motive to have this work is your eyes should move from like left to right as opposed to at a hierarchy, which is sort of how I was taught with miniature painting, is you kind of enter the painting through levels. But with this one, your eyes should just endlessly move. And there's also a tradition, I could be getting it wrong, of a bride being carried on a horse, or like rides on a horse when she comes from a cliffside. Something that we do back home as well. And the fire and wind was very interesting to me, because there was one night in the studios, there was, I think, a thunderstorm, but there was just a howling of a wind that you could hear. And because it's so dark outside, you can't see anything, but you can hear the sound of it. So I kind of wanted to have all of these elements into the works, and there is a figure, which is supposed to be me, on the cliffside, kind of surrendering to nature. And the birds are interesting. There's this myth about birds that, you know, some people, I've heard of this in South Asia as well, if like the moment someone passes away, you can hear the sound of them leaving if it's a bird caws at you. And when you're in St. Ives, there's a lot of birds, like at 2 in the morning sometimes, and I found that to be a bit haunting as well, but it's something that I wanted to incorporate into the paintings. And yeah, then the kind of greenery as well is something that you would find in a lot of Pahari style of paintings, which is these very diluted washes. And it's just something that I think of this painting as almost growing as opposed to containing. I find that like hard to explain sometimes too, where I find the rest of the canvases to kind of have a border. But with this one, I chose to leave it open from the top to kind of have the clouds bursting. And yeah, it's been a challenge, this one, though, I'm not going to lie. This one's been a tricky one to do, and it's something that I just had this intention of creating an expansive painting, and what is that like? And fire is such a huge element of my work. If you've seen it previously, it would just be these huge consuming fires, and it's nice to kind of have that faded into the background. Fire for me is also, strangely enough, autobiographical, and I find that the works have now almost shifted in a new direction, where the paintings, you have to leave enough of yourself out of it so that people can project their own experiences onto it too. So I like it when someone asks me, like, I think this is this. It's great. And yeah, that's something I have understood now is, I guess the more mature you become, you also realize that it's not I think when you're younger, you want to speak, and when you're older, you want to listen. And I'm trying to understand that through paintings as well. That's why I've made it more of a conscious effort to read and research about some of the artists that have lived here, and also the artists that I'm inspired by. And yeah.
I'm just going to see how we're doing for time.
Oh, yes.
I know that we can talk for ages.
We would go on. Yes. We've had many moments, like Alex would just knock at the door and ask, like, how's it going? And then we would talk for hours about everything. And it's been so wonderful also having this, and to be accepted and welcomed into a new and unfamiliar space, and to find your footing. And it's been a really great experience. I think a lot of the learning happened outside of the studio, and this became a place to kind of reflect on it. It's just been great, and getting to go to the beach and seeing a sunset, that can be really inspiring, and it's kind of taught me to be more mindful of everything that's around me. I think London has like a very fast pace sometimes, and it's nice to pause over here and really reflect and feel. So that's why I find the works to be a lot more emotional, I think, and I'm really possessive about this body of work too. I think that's like the last. I always tell Alexandra, this is the last painting.
Yeah,
I'm doing.
I've heard that sentence so many times.
This is it. This is the last one now, and this was inspired by a paper. I was coming back home really late one night, and it was just me on the street, and this ball of paper kept following. It wasn't following me, I know, but it just. I had a creepy feeling that, oh my God, is this paper ball following me right now? And I went back and I made a painting about it. And the glass of milk is also a very common motif that I think you would find it. It's in that one, that wall over there. Albin's hiding it. And and it's just been, it's been a really wonderful time for making and experiencing everything. And having the space to put a mood board is great. That one over there.
Yeah, how have you, in terms of the studio space and working in that, how has that been?
The space is just incredible. And, lighting is something that's so... I felt like when I was working in London, the works had... I had a fluorescent light in my basement studio. So I think the works automatically became a bit darker, and the paint was a lot more heavily concentrated. But here, you kind of have to surrender to the light almost. And the washes became so much more diluted, and blues did enter it. Of course, it had to be inspired by the sea. And I think having that space to really see your paintings and not have to go outside of the room to look at them, which is what I would do. And you really spend, sometimes I would also have hours where I would be in the studio and not paint. I would just be looking at everything. Which can be really nice. It does take some time to adjust your eyes, though, to the light.
Yeah.
It is so bright. But I think this time of like 5:30 golden hour when the sun is setting, and there would be a haze across the room, and I would think, wow, the paintings do look really nice right now. It could just be the lighting, but it's been great. And you really get to sort of focus on... So the chairs over there, like each object that you would see on a chair is something that I've seen in this town, whether it would just be from walking back home or the trip to Sena, or and it's been really wonderful to come back to that.
I feel like we've talked for a while.
Yes.
I wonder if anyone has any questions for Noorain to open it up. Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, sorry.
No, go for it.
Thank you so much. That was so interesting. I was just thinking as well, like these small ones, the tiles, like they're so captivating.
Oh, thank you so much.
And I did really notice them, like when I first came in. They really drew my eye.
Oh, thank you.
Like the vibrancy of the colour and the boldness of the composition. Yeah, I was just sort of like wondering if you'd make those larger.
I know I have thought of a few where you think, God, this looks so good. It would be better on a bigger scale.
But maybe it's not meant to be big.
That's the part of it. Is interesting because that's, in a way, they do kind of inform some of the ideas of the paintings. But that's something I'm going to think about now too, because I think when they're smaller, you're so fixated on just getting the composition right. And that's interesting. It's something that in my first show, this artist who I really admire, Matthew Krishanu, had seen my work, and he had told me that sometimes the smallest canvases that you have, when you blow them up on a much larger scale, it opens completely new avenues for painting. And it is a bit of a challenge, I think, to get the proportions right, but it's something I would definitely try out. I've got 10 days right now, so we're limited on time, but we can see. It would be a mission.
So that was the size you thought that Rothko painted when you first...
I'll never forget the first ever. I had gone to my mum's friend's house, and she had this kind of, must have been from the 90s, this museum, those gift shop books. And I just was looking at it and I thought, wow, that's so tiny and so nice. That's my first ever. I also really tell people about this is, you know, the kind of neck gesture that you do when you look up at a painting? I had that in the V&A when I saw Raphael's cartoons for the first time. It's the first time I've ever had to lift my neck up to look at something like that. And yeah, Rothko's works they're so immersive and expansive, and there was another artist in residence, Tanoa, over here, who said that I think everyone has a Rothko for themselves, and I still haven't found mine yet. I like so much of his work.
I wanted to ask you, when you were doing your training as a miniature painter, I mean, were you painting entire stories, or what was the? You must have thought that you would go on doing that.
Yes,
and
100%.
Not seeing yourself here. So what was the kind of outcome of that training?
So the kind of process of miniature painting is very. It's based on the kind of technique, which is whether making your own paper, making your own brushes, your own pigments. So a lot of that is rooted in tradition, and I think I was a bit of the rule breaker in the course because I would think, I don't want to do it like this. But the whole idea was, it wasn't so much in the replication of the paintings, it was understanding a lot of the rendering and being mindful of, the kind of origin of each painting. So provenance is something that we studied a lot, whether it was the paintings that was coming from like the Himalayan foothills would be very different than what's coming out of the Persian movement of painting at the time. And that was something that I found very interesting. But I remember when I was a student, I would think, oh, this is kind of boring. But I think it was that kind of mindfulness of being present in the studio. There was a discipline, and I had a very strict tutor where if you made a mistake, he would make you start the painting from scratch. I tried so many times to hide the mistake, and he'd say, I saw it, do it again. It's just, and you learn a lot about, I think it's also about kind of showing respect to the process in a way, and really being mindful of your surroundings. I had a tutor prior to my university who taught me painting. I would say she was kind of the first ever exposure I had into, oh, you can actually make a career out of this. This is great. And all I painted with her, which is so interesting, was chairs. That's all I did. For a year, she would put a cane chair, rip it up, and then she would say, draw it. Every day, that's all I did. And I would go back home to my mom and say, art is so boring. Why am I doing this? And I think that, in fact, taught me how to observe. I liken it to Karate Kid. When he's teaching him how to clean.
Your references.
My references are all over the place. But it was kind of like that. I was like, oh, she Miyagi'd me. She did that. It was a wonderful way of learning how to observe. And then miniature painting was, again, the kind of more, I would say, evolved form of that, which was how do you look at something and then recreate it? And interestingly enough, now I don't use a lot of references. Only when I want to figure the proportions of something out. Like the hand over there, I would look at my own hand and try to get it right. And yeah, it's just, I think coming into for me, the biggest change was the scale of something. So the maximum size we would go from was 4 by 6 inches. And then to come here and it would 2 meters. And that was, I think, a physical challenge too. I liken miniature painting to be like a hand to wrist gesture, whereas I think painting on a canvas is a bodily movement, and you feel very tired after that too. Yeah.
How do you think your time here and the influence of the sea will go on to affect and influence the future of your work?
Oh, that's a good question. I do think of, this kind of, I've learned so much on a personal level while being here about patience. And patience, I think, one as a 20-something-year-old as an artist is very hard to grasp as well. It's just, you want people to see the work immediately, but it's something I learned here was it's nice to be able to disappear for some time as well. You're so cut off from, everything that you know, and you begin to reflect a lot and learn to have compassion for yourself and the experiences that you've had, which is something that I learned here. And I discovered that imagination is just empathy too. So hearing people's life stories and just something as simple as, sorry, the mic, why you moved here. And yeah, it's just been great. I'm really looking forward to actually taking these works back into the studio and spending time with them and looking at them. I've kind of, I had the chance to watch this body of work grow from just an idea that you have in a sketchbook and then turn it into a painting. And I sort of had gone in with just this, convince yourself that no one will ever see this and think of the paintings you would make. And you kind of lose that self-consciousness, which is nice. And yeah, I'm excited I'm a bit sad to be going back as well because it's bittersweet, as all wonderful experiences are. And yeah, I have pictures of the sea though. It's a lot of photographs. So I will have a good reference to use. But yeah, thank you.
Any final questions?
I have a question, yes, about borders,
Yes.
edges. 4 of the 5 large paintings have things happening around the edge.
Yeah.
And then within them there's also like borders. And
Yes.
there's, and I just wanted to ask what that meant for you.
Oh, that's sort of a nod to my miniature practice, because in a lot of the paintings you'll see that there are these very intricate borders that were painted. And those motifs were repeated because it was to show you the origin of the painting, of where it was being made from. So the tiles that I see, the tiles is from my house where I was growing up in Pakistan. You have these kind of blue and white tiles across. And what's been nice is I have really bad memory, but strangely enough, when I paint, I'm able to recall a lot more. And so the borders kind of become a way to hint at the story that's about to be told. And sometimes, I had made a painting of a very large chair for my previous show, and I shrunk it down and turned it into a border. And it's nice to be able to, I think, look back at some of the works and tie a thread through that. And for me, that's through borders. And yeah, I don't know if that makes sense.
Can I just ask something?
Yes.
It always intrigues me with residencies how you're going to go back from this space to your tiny basement studio.
It's a bigger one now.
I slightly worry about it as well, what we're doing to you really.
Spoiling. I know. When I came back, physically, even if you're not there, you will remember the sensation of being there. It might be something that London, unfortunately, doesn't have the best sunsets, but I'll be mindful to look at them more often now. And I think it's something like, if I see a blue chair, I'll think of my time at St. Ives. It's small moments like that that I remember. I'm lucky enough to have a notebook with me where I've written down so many of my experiences. And your studio is also a place where you reminisce a lot. So I think it's good to be able to have that. But yes, there are days I'm going to miss this space a lot.
I was thinking more of your frustration as an artist, not being able to do
the expansive work, which is, that's one of the wonderful parts of this, is you get to make it. For me, it's like getting the chance to, and I've realized what almost blessing it is to be able to paint in a studio for 3 months. It's such a gift as an artist to have that. And I'm grateful for the experience that I've had, and you know, I look at residencies and I think this is why people do them. Now I understand. And yeah, whether it would be, you know, going to another space again and seeing the town. And but for me, I think what I'll miss most is, yeah, even just the people and being here. I'll write to you when I'm in my London studio. I think I'm missing this right now. And yeah, it's really been so wonderful. You know, I would have never, I had no kind of expectation when I got the offer to. I was in the middle of a motorway. I texted Wells, so what is this? And just the way that it all kind of came together has been amazing. And the kind of experiences that you take away from it have been wonderful.
That feels like a really nice place to finish, unless there are any more questions. But I just want to say thank you so much. Thank you for allowing us into your studio. It's been such a treat to kind of chat to you and look at your work. So yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.